There are venues in professional sports that carry a certain kind of gravity. Places where the atmosphere alone feels like it's pressing down on your chest the moment you walk through the doors. The Porsche Arena in Stuttgart is one of those places. It has seen Steffi Graf. It has seen Serena Williams. It has seen Martina Navratilova. The court inside that building has absorbed decades of greatness, and the walls somehow remember all of it. But on April 9, 2026, the story that started unfolding wasn't about any of those legends. It was about a 20-year-old from the Philippines who hadn't even played her first match there yet, and somehow, the energy building around her arrival felt like something nobody in that city had quite experienced before. The cameras at Stuttgart Airport weren't waiting for a champion. They were waiting for something harder to define, and honestly, more interesting. They were waiting for Alexandra Eala, and the world she carries with her everywhere she goes. Welcome back to Flespool Court Pro. If you're new here, this channel exists to tell the real story behind the results, behind the rankings, behind the press conference answers that say everything and nothing at the same time. And today, we are telling the full story of how Alex walked into one of the most elite clay court tournaments in the world, not as a seeded favorite, not as a defending champion, not even as a planned entry, and somehow made the entire event feel like it was built around her. This story has everything. A last-minute entry, a packed draw full of slam champions, a fanbase that moves like a tidal wave, and a 20-year-old who handles all of it with a kind of composure that makes you wonder if she's actually been here before in some previous life. Let's go back to where this particular chapter begins, because the context matters enormously. 2 days before the Stuttgart announcement, Alex was in Linz, Austria, playing in the second round of a tournament that had offered some genuine promise. She had come through the first round cleanly, defeating Julia Grabber in a performance that showed exactly the kind of controlled, disciplined tennis her coaches at the Rafa Nadal Academy have been shaping in her for years. The win was convincing. The crowd in Linz was already responding to her. And then she ran into Jelena Ostapenko in the second round, and the match went the way matches against Ostapenko sometimes go, brutally unpredictable, fiercely contested, and ultimately decided by the thinnest of margins. The final score was 6-4, 7-5. 2 sets, but the numbers don't tell the whole story. Alex led in the second set. She had Ostapenko under pressure at 5-5 and couldn't find the door. Ostapenko is a former French Open champion for a reason, and on that particular afternoon, she found just enough to close it out. The loss stung, as losses always do when you know you had chances. But here's the part the scoreboard couldn't capture. When the match ended, the crowd in Linz rose to their feet and gave Alex a standing ovation. Not for winning. For how she played, for how she fought, and maybe for the feeling she gives people when she's on court, this sense that something real and alive is happening. Alex raised her racket, smiled at the crowd, and walked off without a trace of visible frustration. No racket thrown. No staring at the sky in disbelief. Just grace, and then, within 48 hours, a complete and total pivot toward the next challenge. That pivot came faster than anyone expected. The announcement arrived on April 9th. Qin Wenzhong had to withdraw from the Stuttgart main draw due to injury, and the tournament named Alexandra Eala as her direct replacement. One sentence on the official tournament account. One sentence that, within hours, had detonated across Philippine social media like someone had pressed a button labeled Ignite. What happened next is honestly one of the more remarkable things about following Alex's career right now. The Philippine media didn't treat the announcement like a routine injury replacement, which technically and administratively, that's exactly what it was. They treated it like news. Real news. Viral news. Headlines framing her travel to Germany like a state visit. YouTube channels publishing arrival coverage. Fans who had literally just watched her in Austria already mapping out trips to Stuttgart because Stuttgart has one of the largest Filipino communities in Germany, and those communities don't need much of an invitation to show up for their person. The Pinoy diaspora in Europe is one of the most passionate, most organized, and most visibly committed fanbases in all of professional tennis right now, and they had just been handed a reason to converge on southern Germany. Think about what that means from the tournament's perspective. You issue a standard injury replacement notice, the kind of administrative update tournaments publish dozens of times a season, and by nightfall your event is trending across Southeast Asia. That is not a normal occurrence. That is the specific gravitational pull that Alex carries with her, and Stuttgart noticed. Because here's the thing, the Porsche Tennis Grand Prix didn't bury the replacement announcement in a footnote. They promoted it. The language they used was deliberate and telling. They said, fans can now look forward to seeing Alexandra step in. This is a WTA 500 event with Aryna Sabalenka, Iga Swiatek, Coco Gauff, and Elena Rybakina in the draw. Players with Grand Slam titles. Players who have occupied the top 10 like they own the lease. The tournament doesn't need to generate excitement around injury replacements. They chose to frame Alex's entry as something to anticipate, and that choice tells you something important about the moment she's in right now. Her ranking at the time of entry was 46.
Not a top 10 number. Not a seeded spot.
But the tournament's own communication treated her arrival like news, because commercially, culturally, and in terms of pure attention, she absolutely is news. Now let's talk about what she was walking into, because the degree of difficulty here deserves to be said plainly. The Stuttgart draw in the spring clay season is not forgiving territory. It is one of the most competitive fields assembled outside of a Grand Slam, and the players at the top of that draw are not the kind of opponents who ease you into the clay season gently. Sabalenka hits the ball harder than almost anyone alive. Swiatek on clay is arguably the most dominant player the women's game has seen in a generation on that surface specifically. Goff is still ascending and getting more dangerous every month. Rybakina's serve and ball striking are among the best in the world on any surface. Alex was walking into that environment not as someone seeded and protected in the draw, but as a direct replacement expected to compete, expected to show up, and very much expected to deliver on the promise that the tournament's own promotion had set up. That is pressure. Real, tangible, career-defining pressure. And yet the footage of her arrival, the clips making their way across social media, showed a 20-year-old who looked remarkably unbothered. There's something about the way Alex carries herself in these moments that keeps coming up when people who work in the sport talk about her.
It's not arrogance. It's not performance.
It's this quiet internal steadiness that reads as confidence but feels more specific than that. It feels like someone who has done enough work to know who she is on a tennis court, and that knowing gives her a kind of calm that the nerves can't fully penetrate. Her coaching setup for the European clay swing reflects the seriousness of the operation around her. Sandro Vieni on site in Europe, with ongoing support from Joan Bosch at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca. These are not casual arrangements. This is a structured, deliberate technical infrastructure around a player who has a very specific game being developed around a very specific vision. The Nadal Academy doesn't produce players by accident. Everything that comes out of that institution carries a technical fingerprint, an emphasis on topspin, on physicality, on grinding through the long points that clay demands, on trusting the process even when the scoreline is uncomfortable. Alex carries all of that. The clay game is in there. You saw pieces of it in Linz. You saw it in how she handled Ostapenko's flat power, staying patient, constructing points, doing the things that timing-based power hitters struggle to deal with. The tools are real and they're being sharpened in exactly the right environment. But beyond the technical picture, what makes Stuttgart feel like such a pivotal moment is the broader story that Alex is living right now. Because this is not just about one tournament entry or one lucky draw. This is about a through line that has been building for months, a story about what happens when genuine talent meets a fanbase that refuses to let you play alone. The Linz second-round match against Ostapenko produced one of those moments that you don't fully appreciate until you sit with it for a while. The Filipino crowd at that match was so vocal, so consistent, so relentless in their support that Ostapenko, a player who has been around the circuit long enough to have seen everything, felt the need to address a heckler mid-match directly. She made a sarcastic comment inviting the crowd member to come play in her place. After winning, she acknowledged the crowd with an edge to her voice, saying they'd helped her a lot. When a former Grand Slam champion is so rattled by an opponent's fanbase that she's addressing individual crowd members out loud during a match, something unusual is happening in that building. It wasn't even Alex's home country.
It was Austria.
And yet the atmosphere her fans created was thick enough to affect the opponent's rhythm and composure. Now that entire energy, that traveling carnival of passion and noise and belief, is heading to Stuttgart, where the Filipino community is already established, already organized, and already planning. Alex spoke to those fans in Linz after the grabber win in a way that said everything about who she is and what she means to those people. She spoke in English first, and then she switched to Tagalog. She thanked the crowd. She acknowledged that there were many Filipinos there. She said she was happy with how they had been welcomed, and that she was grateful for the hospitality. That moment, the switch to Tagalog, the acknowledgement not just of the crowd as spectators but as partners in what she's doing, that's why the Queen narrative exists around her and why it's not hollow hype. She earns it every time she opens her mouth after a match. She treats the people who came to watch as participants in the story, not just as an audience for it. And they respond in kind. By treating her not as someone they came to observe, but as someone they are genuinely invested in as a person, as a symbol, as proof of something real and possible. This is the part that the rankings don't capture and that the WTA matchup statistics will never fully explain. Alex is doing something that the sport has been trying to manufacture for years. She is cracking open a market, a fan ecosystem, a level of engagement from Southeast Asia that goes far beyond casual interest. The WTA has spent enormous resources trying to grow its footprint in Asia, largely focused on China and Japan, the markets with established infrastructure and economic scale. And then this 20-year-old from the Philippines, trained in Mallorca, ranked 46, shows up in a secondary Austrian tournament as a second-round entrant, and her presence trending on social media overnight. She is doing without a billion-dollar government program what no amount of marketing spend could engineer artificially. She is doing it with talent and grit and the kind of authentic connection with a community that cannot be faked or bought. Tournament directors from Indian Wells to Roland Garros have noticed. Not because of the ranking. Because of what happens to an event's energy when her name is in the draw. Sponsors are watching. Broadcasters are watching.